For more than 100 years, millions of people have climbed the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. Almost none of them knew what was sitting directly under their feet. 65 feet down, sealed behind concrete and darkness, there is a space the size of a football field. It was closed in 1922. Nobody walked through it for 53 years. When workers finally broke into it, what they found inside was not what anyone expected. And it had been growing there, quietly, the whole time. The truth about that room is stranger than any rumor. Here's what's really down there. The swamp. To understand why the hidden room exists, you have to begin with a strange fact. The Lincoln Memorial was built in a place where many people believed it should never stand. The site was called Potomac Flats. Within living memory of the men who chose it, that place had been part of the river. It had been dredged in the late 19th century and turned into reclaimed marsh at the western end of the National Mall. On a map, the location looked perfect. In engineering terms, the ground was a nightmare. People warned about it at the time. They called the land unstable. They called it swampy. They said the soil could never be trusted with a structure that heavy. Building a massive marble temple on a reclaimed riverbed sounded reckless, and from a practical point of view, the warning made sense. Yet the memorial rose there anyway, because the location carried more power than the soil beneath it. The Lincoln Memorial had to complete the Great Line of Washington, D.C. The Capitol stood at one end. The Washington Monument rose in the center. Lincoln had to stand at the west. That line shaped the vision of the city, first imagined by Pierre L'Enfant, and later revived by the Macmillan Commission in 1902. Once that idea had taken hold, mud could not defeat it. So the engineers received a brutal assignment. They had to place 38,000 tons of marble on a swamp and make it stand for generations. Their answer was simple in theory, but enormous in practice. They had to dig down until the earth stopped shifting. The fight over the site matters because it almost ended differently. Joseph Cannon, the Speaker of the House and one of the most powerful men in Washington, hated the location. He is said to have declared that he would never allow a memorial to Abraham Lincoln to be built in that goddamned swamp. Cannon lost the argument. The Lincoln Memorial Commission was created in 1911. Henry Bacon was chosen as the architect. On Lincoln's birthday, in February 1914, workers broke ground. Still, Cannon had understood one thing correctly. The swamp was real. The danger was real. His mistake was believing the problem could stop the project. The engineers of 1914 knew how to solve it, although their solution created something nobody had planned for. Deep under the memorial, a vast hidden space began to take shape. 65 feet construction lasted from 1914 to 1922, and the foundation work was the hardest part. Workers had to dig until they reached bedrock. The reported depth changes depending on the source. Some accounts describe more than 40 feet. Others say the excavation reached as deep as 65 feet. Both figures can make sense because the solid ground beneath the site was uneven. One section could be firm sooner, while another could demand a much deeper cut. Into those deep spaces, crews placed 122 concrete columns. Some were enormous. Their purpose was to carry the full weight of the memorial through the fill, through the mud, and into solid rock. At the same time, the building could not look as though it stood on hidden supports. The memorial needed to appear calm, permanent, and natural, as though it belonged on that rise. So the ground around the columns was filled in and shaped into a landscape. That decision created the undercroft. The space was never meant to be a room. It was the empty area left between the columns after the earth was built up around the outside. It sits between the top of the bedrock and the underside of the memorial floor. It exists because the engineers solved a soil problem and left a massive void behind. No one designed it as a chamber. No one named it with care in the original plans. It was simply the leftover space beneath one of the most famous monuments in America. The word undercroft came later. It is borrowed from church architecture and usually describes a vaulted chamber beneath a church or cathedral floor, often connected with burials. At some point, someone looked at this strange space under the Lincoln Memorial and used that word. The name stayed because the place really does feel sacred and buried. The National Park Service has described it as a cathedral of concrete pillars. That description fits. Down there, gray columns stretch away into darkness in every direction. The space feels accidental, huge, and strangely grand. One person involved in a recent project compared the scale to a two-story shopping mall. That may sound unromantic, but it helps explain the size. The undercroft covers about 43,800 square feet. That is roughly the footprint of a full-size American football field, and the space is arranged across 3 levels. It is the largest concealed space beneath any monument on the National Mall, and it may be the largest hidden space beneath any monument in the country. Above it, the Lincoln Memorial was dedicated on May 30, 1922. Robert Todd Lincoln attended the ceremony. He was Abraham Lincoln's last surviving son. He was 78 years old, and as a young man, he had lived in the White House when his father was assassinated. After the ceremony, the doors to the space below were shut. For the next 53 years, almost nobody went inside. Joe and Mike. The hidden room becomes more than an engineering story when you notice what the workers left behind. On the concrete pilings, the men who poured them wrote on the walls. The National Park Service later described the graffiti as a myriad. Names appeared across the columns. Dates appeared too. There were jokes, drawings, and small marks of personality scattered through a place those workers had every reason to believe no visitor would ever see again. 2 men traced their hands on a wall and signed below them. Joe and Mike. That is all we know. 2 hand outlines, 2 first names, a concrete pillar 60 feet below a monument to Abraham Lincoln. The marks were probably made around 1915 by 2 workers whose full names have never been confirmed and almost certainly never will be. No payroll record has been matched to them. No photograph has been found. The workforce at the site included many immigrant laborers, and in Washington at that time, it also included many black workers. The records that would let historians identify 2 men by first name alone were not kept with that kind of care. So Joe and Mike survive as hands on concrete. That small trace is their entire biography. The workers also drew cartoons. The most remarkable known example shows Mutt and Jeff, characters from what is widely regarded as the first successful daily newspaper comic strip in America. Bud Fisher created the strip in 1907, and by the 1910s the characters had become famous across the country. That detail makes the scene feel alive. A construction worker at the Lincoln Memorial, during the years of the First World War, took a break in the dark and drew newspaper cartoon characters on a column that nobody was supposed to see. Mutt and Jeff were well known at the time. One was tall and thin, the other was short, and their adventures appeared in hundreds of newspapers. They even showed up in early animated shorts. For people in the 1910s, they were among the most recognizable cartoon figures in America. So somewhere around 1915, a laborer on a federal construction site stood beneath the unfinished memorial and drew the popular characters of his day on a foundation column. That may be one of the oldest surviving examples of someone doodling a comic strip character on a wall in American public architecture. It sits directly beneath the Lincoln Memorial. When the graffiti was rediscovered, it was covered with plexiglass to protect it. Some of the worker graffiti has now been reproduced in the new visitor facilities upstairs. Replicas appear in the restrooms, which feels unusual at first, then starts to feel oddly fitting, because the originals were found in a forgotten service space below the monument. Soda straws 9 feet long. The undercroft has another secret, and this one made scientists pay attention. Rainwater moved through the marble and the fill above the space. As it passed through concrete and stone, it picked up calcium carbonate. Then it dripped into the darkness below. Over decades, each drop left behind a tiny mineral trace. Those traces built downward from the ceiling. The formations under the Lincoln Memorial are known as soda straws. They are thin, hollow tubes that grow around a single channel of water. Their walls are extremely brittle. In limestone caves, formations like these are common. Under a national monument, they are startling. Some of the soda straws grew more than 9 feet long. Below them, the same water-shaped deposits on the floor. Younger formations spread out in flat circles that the people who documented them compared to fried eggs. Older formations rose into shapes that reminded observers of sandcastles. Life had also found the place. Spiders lived there. Moths lived there. Other small creatures had made their way into the darkness too. The space had no sunlight, but it had a steady water source. Insects fed on each other and on whatever organic material came down with the rain. That means the undercroft became a working underground ecosystem. It formed by accident inside the foundation of a federal monument in the capital city of the United States. For half a century, it continued undisturbed. The reason is almost beautiful in its simplicity. The space had no public purpose. Maintenance crews had little reason to enter. The drawings that showed the area were already decades old. Keys were not easy to find, and the room had slipped out of ordinary memory. America had built a cave and then forgotten where it was. There is also a scientific side to this story. Speleologists study caves, and they distinguish between natural caves and spaces sometimes called anthropogenic caves, meaning caves shaped by human activity. The undercroft is one of the more dramatic accidental examples. Construction created a subterranean environment. Wildlife entered it. Mineral formations grew there. A hidden world formed under a monument without anyone planning it. 9 feet of soda straw growth in 53 years is especially fast by cave standards. That speed makes sense because the ceiling was made from concrete and marble, materials that gave the dripping water a rich supply of calcium carbonate. Today, the National Park Service uses the undercroft in educational material to teach students about stalactite formation. The lesson also points them toward Mammoth Cave in Kentucky, the longest known cave system in the world. That detail quietly brings the story back to Lincoln, because Kentucky was the state where he was born. The flashlight tours. After the undercroft was rediscovered in 1975, the National Park Service saw the obvious possibility. A park official named Leroy Rowell suggested placing a window in the wall so visitors could look into the underground cavern. Public interest was strong. A few trial tours showed that people wanted to see it. Soon, the Lincoln Memorial began offering undercroft tours on Wednesday and Thursday nights. Visitors entered with flashlights. They went down into a cave beneath Lincoln. They saw stalactites, hidden columns, worker graffiti, and drawings left by men in 1915. It is hard to imagine a better tour in Washington. Then the tours ended. The problem was asbestos. Many structures from that period contained materials that seemed ordinary in 1922 and dangerous by the 1980s. Once asbestos became a public safety concern, administrators could no longer walk visitors through the space. The undercroft was closed again. The sketches, formations, and insects returned to darkness. The sad part is that the hidden world did not remain untouched. Soda straws are incredibly fragile. In some places, their walls are less than half a millimeter thick. A formation that took decades to grow can be broken by a hand, by a shift in airflow, or by vibration from construction work. During the years after the tours ended, environmental controls, remediation work, and time damaged many of the formations that the 1975 visitors had seen. The cave discovered in the 1970s was not exactly the cave that opened to visitors this year. For nearly another 40 years, the space stayed mostly sealed. A few researchers entered from time to time. A digital preservation team documented the columns. One person involved in that work described the experience plainly. Down in the basement of the Lincoln Memorial, there were things written on some pillars. The builders had drawn cartoons. The markings were protected behind plexiglass. Most of the time, though, the undercroft remained quiet. It kept doing the job it had always done. It held up the memorial. That part should not be overlooked. More than a century after the dedication, the Lincoln Memorial still stands on reclaimed swamp. It carries tens of thousands of tons of marble through harsh winters, endless freeze-thaw cycles, heavy crowds, and countless vibrations from the living city around it. The monument has not moved. Joseph Cannon's goddamn swamp turned out to be a problem that engineers could solve. And the forgotten room beneath Lincoln is the reason. $18.5 million. The current chapter of this story begins in 2016 with one check. David Rubenstein, the billionaire philanthropist, donated $18.5 million to help open the undercroft of the Lincoln Memorial to the public. That single donation gave life to a project that had been sitting in the shadows for a long time. By June 2017, the National Park Service had announced the plan formally. It sent a proposal to the National Capital Planning Commission, along with a rendering that showed a viewing platform stretching out into the underground space. From there, visitors would be able to look across the columns, the old construction marks, and the graffiti left behind by workers. The hope was clear at the start. The space would open in 2022, just in time for the memorial's centennial. That did not happen. The Lincoln Memorial turned 100 years old while the room beneath it remained closed. Then the project grew. By the time construction began in 2023, the budget had risen to something close to $69 million. About $26 million came from federal funds. Another $48 million came from the National Park Foundation and other donors, depending on which accounting is used. Officials described the work as the largest project at the memorial since the building was dedicated in 1922. The idea had taken 10 years to reach that point. The delays matter because they explain why the cost climbed so sharply. This was never simple construction. Workers were operating inside the foundation of a building that could not be allowed to shift. Every change had to be studied because 38,000 tons of marble were sitting directly above their heads. The asbestos that ended the old tours in the 1980s had to be removed safely. The graffiti and forgotten objects had to be protected instead of cleared away. An elevator had to be added so more visitors could reach the space. A controlled environment had to be created inside a room that had spent a century dealing with leaking water. At the same time, the memorial above had to stay open. That mattered because around 8 million people visit it every year. Then a pandemic arrived in the middle of the process, and the work became even harder. After all of that, the undercroft opened free to the public in the summer of 2026. The timing carries meaning. In 2026, the United States reaches its 250th anniversary. The Park Service wanted the most visited monument on the National Mall to offer visitors something new, something hidden beneath a place they thought they already knew. What you actually see 15,000 square feet of the undercroft has been turned into an exhibition space. The rest of the 43,000 square feet remains closer to what it always was. The centerpiece is a wall of glass that reaches from the floor to the ceiling. Through it, visitors look straight into the grid of concrete columns that holds the memorial up. The columns are lit from inside the darkness. They seem to stretch farther and farther back until the eye loses track of them. Photographs struggle to capture the feeling. In person, the sight works because the space refuses to end neatly in your mind. Behind the glass, the exhibition begins with the physical history of the memorial. Visitors see tools and objects left behind by construction workers. They see historical graffiti. They learn how the memorial was built, from the excavation and the concrete columns to the marble and the craftsmanship. Then the story changes. A room that began as an engineering space becomes something larger. The undercroft starts telling the story of how the Lincoln Memorial became what one person involved in the project called America's civic stage. The exhibition includes Marian Anderson's concert on Easter Sunday, April 9, 1939. Anderson was one of the great contraltos of the century. The Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let her use Constitution Hall because she was black. Eleanor Roosevelt resigned from that organization because of it. Interior Secretary Harold Ickes then arranged for Anderson to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 75,000 people came to hear her. She opened with "My Country, 'Tis of Thee." During the song, she made one small change. She sang, "To Thee We Sing," instead of Thee I Sing." That single word shift turned a familiar national song into something sharper, deeper, and more public. Millions more heard the concert on the radio. The exhibition also covers the March on Washington on August 28, 1963. 250,000 people gathered on the Mall that day. Martin Luther King Jr. stood on the steps of the memorial and delivered a speech that began from a written text, then moved into history after Mahalia Jackson urged him forward. The exact spot is marked. An engraving sits on the 18th step from the top, where King stood. That step is directly above the undercroft. This creates the emotional center of the whole project. The room exists because engineers in 1914 had to reach bedrock. People now want to walk through it because of everything that happened on the marble above it. You stand beneath the exact place where history spoke upward. The exhibition understands that connection. It does more than explain how the memorial was built. It shows how the Lincoln Memorial became the place Americans go when they want to speak to the country. Marian Anderson's organizers chose it in 1939. The March on Washington chose it in 1963. Later demonstrations chose it because the building gave weight to their message. Henry Bacon did not design the memorial for that purpose. He designed a temple for a dead president. The room below now shows how a building can begin with one purpose, then gather another through the actions of a country. That story gives the stone a living memory. Booking a ticket. The practical details matter because this is now a place people can actually visit. Walk-up tickets are released every day at 8:45 in the morning. They are given out on a first-come, first-served basis at a kiosk near the Korean War Veterans Memorial. Visitors go through security screening before entering. Inside, the space includes an interactive exhibition, educational displays about the engineering and craftsmanship, a bookstore, and restrooms. Even the restroom walls carry replica worker graffiti. That detail deserves a moment because it closes a strange little circle. The undercroft was rediscovered in 1975 by workers renovating the lavatories. 51 years later, the lavatories show images of what those workers found. The National Park Service asks visitors a thoughtful question. in its educational material. How might this space change the way a visitor understands Lincoln as a human being rather than only as a symbol? That question reaches the real heart of the place. The answer is found in the graffiti more than in the columns. The vault that isn't. So, is there a secret vault beneath the Lincoln Memorial with shocking contents inside? The true answer is more interesting. Beneath the memorial sits a structural void that was part of the building's foundation system from the beginning. Its existence appeared in the construction drawings. Workers knew about it. Engineers built around it. Then, because the space had no public purpose, it faded from attention. Over time, water entered. Stone and concrete changed slowly. The room began to act almost like a cave. Small creatures moved through the darkness. Stalactites formed. A forgotten foundation space became a hidden world under one of America's most famous monuments. That truth has more power than the invented version. The myth of a secret vault exists because strange facts about famous buildings attract extra drama. Yet the real details are already strange enough. A hidden chamber with mysterious state secrets could be imagined under almost any building. 9-foot soda straws growing from rainwater under a presidential memorial feel far more specific. 2 workers named Joe and Mike tracing their hands on concrete feel even more human. A made-up vault cannot compete with the boots. Consider what is actually down there. There are 43,800 square feet of accidental architecture. There are 122 columns driven 40 to 65 feet into reclaimed swamp, so the monument above could stand. There are thousands of soda straw stalactites, some more than 9 feet long, formed by rain leaking through the memorial. There are spiders, moths, and rodents that lived in darkness for 53 years without public knowledge. There are boots, caps, and tools left by men who finished their work in 1915, set their things down, and never returned for them. Then, on a concrete pillar in the dark, there are 2 outlines of hands and 2 names, Joe and Mike. Those 2 men traced their hands on a wall they had every reason to believe nobody would ever see. They were not creating a public monument. They were not writing for history. As far as they knew, the space would be sealed, forgotten, and left in darkness. Still, they left their mark. That impulse reaches far back into human history. It is the same basic urge behind handprints on cave walls in France 30,000 years ago. Here, the act happened in 1915, in concrete, under a marble temple, by men whose surnames have disappeared. 111 years later, a National Park Service project costing close to $70 million has placed those hands behind glass, lit them, and opened the room so Americans can come and look. The memorial upstairs honors one man. Daniel Chester French's seated figure of Lincoln is 19 feet high. It was carved from 28 blocks of Georgia marble by the Piccirilli brothers of the Bronx. They were 6 Italian immigrant stone carvers. Their names appear on very little, yet their hands shaped some of the most important monumental sculpture in America. That statue is one of the most recognizable objects in the world. The room underneath honors the men who helped make the monument possible. No one designed the space to do that. It happened because engineers needed bedrock. It happened because water found its way in. It happened because workers in 1975 broke through a wall while fixing a lavatory. It happened because 2 laborers, sometime in 1915, traced their own hands on a pillar in the dark. The monument above was built to be seen forever. The room below was built to be forgotten. Now it carries the fingerprints,